12, and then you can also turn over to Acts chapter 14 at the same time. And 2 Corinthians is where we're going to be through most of it, but I'm going to read that passage, and then I'll read a passage in Acts, and then we'll end up back in 2 Corinthians. So 2 Corinthians chapter 12, we're continuing to talk about trials and our faith through trials and growing our faith. And, you know, okay, there we go. The faith that triumphs. So the title of like the whole lesson series is about faith. And they're like, but every lesson we've been talking about is about all the bad stuff that happens in our life. And it's interesting to me, the more that faith is tied to the difficulties, right? That faith, our faith and our trust in God is tied to the difficulties. It's easy to trust when everything's good. It's easy to trust when everything's great. And we should. And God, even when things aren't great, God is still good to us. But when it's just the personal thought, the more I study it, the more I look at it, it's like, yeah, every time someone's faith is grown or Jesus says your faith is weak, it's usually a difficulty that they have experienced or are experiencing, going to experience. And so God doesn't take away the difficulties in life, but he gives us a way to get through them, and he helps us through them. So this week we're talking about his sufficiency through those difficult times. And is he enough? And there's so many sermons and lessons that we've talked about contentment, about if God's enough for us in our life, and we touched on the difficulties in life when that happened as well. So it's not something new that you've never heard. It's not something you've never thought of. It's just a reminder and an example from Paul on, God is enough. If we understand that, and if our perspective is correct, God is enough for us. But during those difficult times, with Job, with Paul, sometimes we can get distracted and we get desperate, we get anxious, we get fearful, and we forget that God is enough for us. So, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, we're going to start at verse number 1. This is Paul. So Paul says, "Not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory, I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord." Then he talks about a man, and he talks about someone, but it's himself he's talking about. "I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such as one caught up into the third heaven." So he's talking about a vision that he himself had, where whether he physically actually went to heaven, or if it's just a vision that mentally and spiritually, he's not really sure. So even after he experienced it, he's like, I don't know if my actual body went there, or if I was like out of it and had a vision and God showed me. I don't know. But this happened to me. Verse number 3, it says, "I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell, God knoweth, how that he was caught up into paradise, and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for man to utter. Of such an one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in mine infirmities." So he's saying, I had this amazing thing happen to me, where I didn't just have, ate some bad pizza late at night and had a really weird dream, right? No, he actually went to heaven. God took him to heaven, showed him things for his benefit and for God's purpose, whatever God's purpose was, but showed Paul things that he's like, I can't even begin to explain to you, nor would I even be able to know the words to use to tell you what I saw and what God showed me. So God did something to Paul that he didn't do to very many people, right? Showed him heaven. Can you imagine seeing heaven where you'll live forever before dying? That's what happened to Paul. And so, it makes him kind of a unique individual and a pretty big deal, to be honest with you, right? So he says, I want to glory about that. I'm excited about that, but I'm not going to be excited about glory in myself, right? Verse number 5, "Yet of myself I will not glory, but in my infirmities." So immediately he starts talking about his shortcomings. Verse number 6, "For though I would desire to glory or boast about what I saw, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth. But now I forbear, lest any man should think me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth of me." He says, I would really love to tell everybody all the amazing things I saw, but you're going to think I think I'm somebody special if I do that. You're going to think, there's no way for me to get away from telling you how special I felt and how loved I felt without you being like, okay, guy, get off your high horse. So I'm just not going to say anything about it. Verse number 7, "Unless I should be exalted above measure, though through the abundance of revelation." So because God showed me so many things, I could really think I'm important. "There was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, For my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches and necessities and persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then I am strong. So Paul is saying, I had this amazing thing happen to me. I don't want to talk about it because everyone's going to think I'm awesome. And I think it's pretty awesome that God loves me that much. And so I'm going to keep it on the down low. And so much so that God allowed this thing to come into my life that is going to keep me humble. So a lot of people think he had a vision problem or an eye problem in other places. He says something about how churches would gladly pluck their own eyes out and give it to him. So either he had something with his eyes that was an issue his whole life, that without it, he would have been able to serve better probably. But his perspective is that God gave it to me, or that Satan gave it to me, and God allowed it to happen to keep me humble. So that I don't think that I'm somebody special, that I realize that I'm really nothing. And so that was the idea. And then he starts to talk about how the difficulties in life actually are a benefit for him and a positive in his life, and allow him, as he says, to have Christ's power rest upon him, because when he's weak, then he's strong because of the Lord's involvement. Okay, so go over to Acts chapter 14 real quick. I'm just going to read a couple verses here, 21 and 22. They're going back to the church at Antioch, and they're talking about people that they've talked to, one to the Lord. Verse number 21 of Acts 14 says, And when they had preached the gospel to that city and had taught many, they returned again to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, confirming the souls of the disciples and exhorting them to continue in the faith. So they're preaching, they're starting churches, and they're going back to churches they've been to, and they're telling the people there, they're exhorting them, they're lifting them up, they're teaching them, and they're telling them, confirming to them at the end there, verse number 22, it says, and that we must through much tribulation enter into the kingdom of God. So they're making a point to teach people that have started new churches, new Christians, that life is difficult, and life is going to be difficult. And so just so you know, these guys coming back through after winning them to Christ, starting churches, they're coming through saying, just so you know, tribulations will come. Now, in the first century church, they were being literally hunted. Right? There were many that were seeking their life, and we don't have those tribulations for us in America, at least not today. Right? So we have not had to experience that. There are people in the world today that experience that. There are people that are meeting today that if they get caught, their lives are literally in danger. So it still is happening like it did in the first century to many Christians in the world. We're just fortunate enough, blessed enough to live in America that we didn't have to think twice about that today at all. It was not even consideration for us on whether our livelihoods or our lives are in danger by meeting. So they're just going by and saying difficulties will come. And the reason why I wanted to read that verse there, or those verses, is just to reinforce something we already know, is that life is difficult and tribulations do come. And for us, not a lot of our tribulations come because we're persecuted for our faith. There's just life difficulties that happen and make tribulations and trials come. And regardless if we're persecuted for our faith or persecuted just by living life and being an adult and being a human being, is God enough through those difficult times? And that's what Paul is saying here in chapter 12, is that even through all the difficulties that I have suffered and all the things that I have this specific issue that I can't get rid of and I wish it would go away, God's enough for me because of that. Right? Because of the difficulties, it helps me to realize that God is enough for me. So one of the reasons God allows difficulties and even failures in our life is so we can learn that the sufficiency of his grace is what we need to live out the Christian life victoriously. Right? And that's a mouthful, and that's a long sentence. I realize that. But the difficulties come, and the failures even in your Christian life, the difficulties and failures in your physical life, they come so that we have an opportunity to realize we need him. And that without him, what are we doing? Right? That's why God allows difficulties. That's probably not the only reason. There's a lot of reasons why difficulties come. But God does have a purpose. Right? He has a purpose in doing that. Right? So the sufficiency of God's purpose is our difficulties aren't meaningless tragedies that just happen. Right? These aren't things that just, woe is me, this unforeseen circumstance maybe to us, but the tragedies that happen in our life aren't meaningless. Right? The difficulties that come aren't meaningless. From the minimal, smallest, I broke my toe, right? What an inconvenience, to losing of a loved one, right? Like no, in every scope in between, nothing happens for just no reason. God doesn't work that way. God is not the author of chaos, right? There's always purpose and meaning for everything, right? So our difficulties aren't meaningless tragedies. I just said that. It's amazing. But they are allowed by God to accomplish a good purpose in us, right? So every difficulty is allowed by God to accomplish something in your life. So I've said this many times, and I say it a lot just because I have to convince myself of it, right? Difficulties, tragedies, trials are opportunities. And I have to say it to myself to be reminded of myself that when trials and difficulties comes, these aren't reasons to quit or give up or woe is me or go away. They're opportunities for me to learn something, for God to give something to me, for God to use me in a way, for God to reinforce something. I don't know what it is always, but they're opportunities for God to do something. He always has a purpose. And I use this term, it wasn't my original term, but every difficulty is Father filtered. Meaning nothing comes to your life that hasn't already gone through God the Father. He knows it. And He's allowed it to pass through Him, through His allowance to you. And there are probably many things that could have come to our life that God has prevented. Right? It was filtered through the Father, and the Father kept it back. He held it back. He didn't allow it to happen. But there are things that have happened to us that God has filtered and allowed to come through. So those things that are in your life are there. There's a purpose for them. And our job, our goal is to trust God that He'll show us what those purposes are. And if we're willing and humble enough, God will show us those purposes, and He'll make us more of who we were before the trials came. So Paul's thorn in the flesh in this instance is no exception, right? Our enemy would like us to boast about the victories God gave us. So Paul had been given much, right? The way he grew up, he lists through his credentials in other parts of Scripture, right? All the things that he was to all the people, all the education and the things that he had received. He received direct revelation from God. We just read, like, he literally went to heaven and saw things that nobody alive has ever seen. Paul had been blessed. And he did not boast in these things. He didn't even write about them. He was humble about them. What the devil would love for us to do, and what he would have loved for Paul to do, is to boast and be proud of the things that God did. That's what the devil would love for us to do too, is to be so proud and so happy and so, look at me, for all the things that God has done for me. I have not done these things for myself. I have not had the abilities to do the things that God has allowed me and used me to do in my life. Even look at your children. You didn't do anything to form that child, to make them be who they are, right? And only through God's grace and ability are you able to help teach them and hopefully guide them and mold them to be who God wants them to be. But you're just kind of a bystander, just kind of, again, stewarding God's gift to you with even your children. But we can be like, I'm so proud of my kid. They did this, they did that. They've never done this, they've never done that. We have nothing to do with that. It's all about God and His grace to us. And the devil would love us to be so proud of even the good things that we have done, because then it's us. And we're excluding credit to whom it is due, to God. God is the one that has done it. So if we are so proud about, Paul could have been so proud about, well, I was chosen to go to heaven. Nobody else was. I came back. It's so amazing. I'm not even going to tell you about it. Sorry. He could be really arrogant about what happened to him, but the devil would love that because it has nothing to do with Paul. That's all God. God did those things for him. So Paul was humble about it, right? He didn't think that he had something in his life and took credit for what God had done, right? Leading us to pride, because we know pride comes before a fall, right? God made it clear to him, to Paul, that his thorn that he had in his life was, in part at least, allowed in his life to help Paul live with the dependence he needed on God, right? That we know that God told him that. He asked him 3 times, remove it from me. And he says, no, I'm enough for you. I'm enough for you with the thorn. You can live with it. So when we're proud and self-sufficient, we resist God, right? The pride resists God resists the proud. We know that, but He gives grace to who? The humble, right? So when we become proud and self-sufficient, in other words, I don't necessarily need God to help me get through my workday. I've been there long enough now. I know what I'm doing. I don't need God's help in it. It's autopilot for me. I'm self-sufficient. When it comes to rearing my kids, I've done this with a couple other ones, or I've been doing this the school thing or this parenting thing for a while and kind of on a routine, which routines are good, but when we get to the point where we're self-sufficient, I don't necessarily need God's intervention because I've been doing this so long and so far it's working out the way at least it's convenient for me in the moment. So I don't necessarily ask God every day before I go to work, God, help me today at my job. Help me to be the person I'm supposed to be. Help me be the help to those around me. I just go to work because it's Tuesday and that's what I do. And I just kind of autopilot, self-sufficient through that day. That's a version of pride, right? And when we become pride and self-sufficient, we lose God's grace. We lose his favor, the one thing that we need to help us in our difficulties and in our trials. So when we come to a time of trial, remember one of the gifts God gives you is humility. It's a gift that God gives you is humility through those trials, because that humility allows you to receive his grace, right? His purpose for you, his purpose or the reason for the trial is that he's enough. And the grace that he has to offer you is enough to get you through that difficulty, right? So it's sufficiency in his promise or in his purpose. So he has a reason for it. Again, I sorry, I'm not putting these up in the right order. We need what we need most to live through the Christian life and serve God is his grace, is his favor. Humility is how we receive that grace, right? Did I have it written down? James 4:6 says, but he giveth more grace, right? Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble, right? So God gives grace to those that are humble. So when you're humble through difficulties, through trials, when it's not about how dare you, God, or how dare you, person, or how dare you, circumstance, but it's about humility and about, okay, God, what is it that you're trying to show me through this hard time that I can't handle? What is it that you want to give me? That's when God offers grace, is he gives grace to those that are humble, right? So that's his purpose. If that's all it is, if all we get through that trial is humility, that's a gift. That's a purpose. That's a reason to have a difficulty, is to teach us humility. But that's not always his only reason. But sufficiency in God's promise. So, God didn't just have a purpose for Paul's thorn, right? He also had a promise. Paul asked him to take it away there in verse number 8. He asked him 3 times. And there's nothing wrong with Paul asking God to take away the thorn. Jesus himself asked God if this cup could pass from me, if there's any way that I could avoid this, Lord, as God's son. So there's nothing wrong with asking for God to take difficulties away or trials away, but God answered no, right? God answered no to Paul. He said, no, I'm not taking that way. So the no is followed with an amazing promise, which there is in verse 9. It says, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. So God is saying, my strength, my abilities, which we know God's abilities are endless, they're infinite, it's everything. He can do what he wants to do and can do when you're weak, when you know you're weak, when you understand you aren't what you need to be. When you have a thorn in the flesh, when you have a difficulty in your life and you're like, I can't do this. I can't fix this situation. There's literally, like, even if I knew what to do, I don't. Like, I don't even know what to do to even begin to fix it. And God's like, okay, you're where you need to be. Are you willing to accept that fact about yourself? Or are you going to try harder to figure it out? Or make up something? Or manipulate the situation, right? God is saying, my strength, what I can do is exactly what it is when you understand that you're weak. And that's a promise to us, right? The word, he offers his grace to us. The word there, charis, is his grace. It's charis. It describes God's undeserved favor to mankind. And we know this, okay? We know mercy, we know grace, we understand we are saved through grace because God gives us his favor because of what Jesus did for us. It's nothing that we have done that has earned anything about our salvation, but all that God has done. But now sometimes I think we end it there. Grace ends in our life at salvation, and we get a little worried about grace because some people misuse grace and use it as a license to live how they want to live and say, God gives me grace so I can do however I want to do. There are no standards, there are no rules. I just get to do whatever I want to do. And that's not what grace is, right? Grace is favor that God gives to us, and we see he resists the proud, so we do know there is ways to kind of lose out on God's favor by how we act. It doesn't mean you lose salvation. You never lose that. That grace is taken care of. That payment is made. But the grace that God offers us on a daily basis is favor. It's like I have this issue. So sometimes I teach things that I struggle with and I explain it out loud because it helps me understand it. And you might be like, duh, okay. It's for me, and sometimes it helps me, and if it helps you, great. If not, that's okay. But it's like having your boss's favor, right, at work. If you have your boss's favor, like if you and your boss are good, or tight, or have a good relationship, work's easier. Work's more enjoyable. Like, that doesn't mean that he's like giving you an extra 10 minutes on your lunch break. That doesn't mean that he's paying you more than everyone else, or that something shady's going on. It just means that he or she knows you're a good worker. You do what you're supposed to do. You're honest. You're trustworthy. They know you're going to fulfill the expectations they have of you, if not more so. And so you automatically get favor of that. Versus someone that they have to be on every 10 minutes because they're always distracted. They're not where they're supposed to be. They know they're not going to hit the deadlines they're supposed to hit. The favor from the boss is not on them. They're being, what the employees will say, he's always riding me. He's always giving me grief. He's always on me for not doing this, not doing that. The employees that earn the favor, they're trusted. And they have favor. And so do they get special attention? Sometimes they get ignored and that's sometimes good with your boss too. When the boss isn't necessarily hovering over you, that's always better. Because then you can do what you need to do, right? So that's how I think about it. Or even like with a grandparent, right? If you just say you had a really rich grandparent, you were their favorite grandkid. Like, that's the favor that God is giving us, right? That grandkid does nothing to earn the favor from grandpa. Just for some reason, grandpa's like, you're my favorite grandkid, right? And so they take you to ice cream when they don't take the other grandkids to ice cream, right? You get to go over to grandpa's house and he lets you play with the toys that maybe the other ones aren't allowed to. Right, that's the favor and it seems, okay, well, that's unfair. No, this is God saying, I give grace to everybody. You all have earned, none of you deserve it, but I offer it to everybody. And if you're a humble servant, child, if you're a humble person, that's how you receive my favor. Now, if you're going to be arrogant and proud, like the co-worker that doesn't think they can be told anything, isn't easily corrected, can't be told they're wrong. Every time they said, do this different way, they have a yeah, but. Right? That person is being prideful. They're not going to get the grace or the favor from the boss. But the one that's humble, follows directions, does what they're supposed to do, they get the favor. So in my mind, that helps me understand. Helps me take the giant word grace that gets misconstrued and misused often and brings it down to reality in my life where it's not a perfect analogy. I realize that. Spiritual and physical, they don't equate. But for my mind, it helps me to start to understand that God's grace is, we don't deserve it. It's God, for God, the creator of the universe, to have favor for me, to give me favor, to look at me fondly. Like like Paul, that makes me want to like lower my head and say, I don't deserve that. But I am so glad he offers it. I am so glad that he gives it to us. So God tells Paul, my favor is enough for you in difficulties. And that's the thought. So yes, my grace is sufficient for you. Like those words, like grace sufficient. We don't say that we might. If we read a lot of books, you probably say sufficient in your vocabulary. But we don't talk that way. And so that seems abstract to me sometimes. But if God says, yes, in your difficulty, I favor you. I favor your life. I want to help you. God says, I am enough for you. My favor for you is enough to get you through the most difficult situations, the most difficult circumstances, because you have my favor. You have my blessing on your life. So anything you go through, the thorns that are in your life, the thorns in your physical being, your emotional, your relationships, your health, all the things you couldn't control in your life that are hard and you don't know how to get through them, you have my favor in your life, which is going to get you through the most difficult thing you can get through. And that's how you can say, oh man, without these difficult things, without these trials in my life, to know I need God to get through them, I might just kind of go through life self-sufficient. I don't need God that much because I know how to do this. I can get through that on my own. I'm capable to do this. But God says, I bring sometimes those difficulties in your life, Paul. We'll get there. We aren't going to get there today, but we'll get there. All the difficulties that he went through in his life. He was blessed and favored, highly exalted, but he also had so many terrible things that happened to him. And God says, I allow those things to happen to you because then you know you need me. Then you know it's not like I'm going to stick my finger in your eye so you can say, well, God, can you take your finger out of my eye? You're the only one that can do it. God's saying, you need to lean on me more. And that's all for us as Christians. There's not a day, I don't think, that every one of us, myself, can't say I need God more, that I should have leaned on him more, that I should have trusted him more than I trusted myself today. Every single day, when the day is over, I can look back and say, I did not, there's no way in my day that I lean on God enough. There were many times where I was I was good. I had it. I didn't consult him. I didn't consider him. And God says, your life is going to be so much more blessed, so much more fulfilled, even through the difficulties, if you realize how much you need me. And that's why sometimes the purpose of the difficulties come. And that's the promise, though, that he gives with the difficulties, is that no matter how difficult it is, you have his favor. And he wants you to learn something through it. He wants you to grow through it. By the end of the trial, the goal is for you to be closer to him than you were before. To understand your need for him more than you did before. And if that's the only thing you get out of the trial, that's a victory. That's a victory in that situation. And we need to understand, it's hard for us to see that sometimes as humans. We're like, well, is that a victory? If we're questioning, is it a victory? Yeah, more of God's a victory. More of him is definitely a victory. Stronger faith in him is a victory. So I'm going to end there. I've got another couple points that I want to go through, and I think they're valid because it'll reinforce God's ability to be sufficient for us, and that he doesn't need it. He doesn't need me to tell you how sufficient he can be for you. He is, but Paul tells us, and so I think it's valid to go through and kind of explain that. So we'll end there.